It started with a video, a 10-second clip that spread like wildfire across the internet. Meghan Markle, smiling, relaxed, her feet casually stretched out across the plush leather seat of a limousine, recording herself as the car glided through the golden streets of Paris. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But it wasn't just any street. It was that street, the one leading to the Pont d'Alma tunnel, where Princess Diana's car crashed in 1997, where the world lost the people's princess. And now, nearly 3 decades later, her son's wife was gliding over that same asphalt, laughing. To many, it was just a social media post. But to millions of others, especially in Britain, it was an act of blasphemy. The tone, the location, the timing, everything felt off. And within hours, hashtags like #disrespect to Diana and #ban Meghan were trending worldwide. The internet erupted. Comments flooded in faster than any PR team could delete them. Does she even understand what she's doing? One user asked. Another wrote, imagine flaunting yourself in a car near the place your mother-in-law died, just for clout. Sickening. But then came the ones that hurt the most. She's mocking Diana. She's not one of us. She's gone too far. And they weren't just whispers from strangers online. Inside royal circles, behind those ancient palace walls, Meghan's name was being spoken in tones colder than the marble floors of Buckingham Palace. Because this time, it wasn't a tabloid rumor. It wasn't paparazzi trickery. It was her own video, her own hands, her own choices. And for King Charles, this wasn't just a scandal. It was an open wound torn apart. Imagine being the father who watched his ex-wife die in that tunnel and then seeing his son's wife glamorize it for her followers. For Charles, that moment symbolized everything he'd feared about Meghan from the start. Reckless, performative, unrestrained. But before we dive into the palace reaction, let's rewind. Let's ask the question that everyone's been whispering but no one dares to say out loud. Did Meghan Markle know exactly what she was doing? Or was it really just an accident? A moment of oblivious vanity caught at the wrong place, the wrong time? Let's unpack it. The timing couldn't have been worse. Meghan had just re-entered the global spotlight after a quiet year, attending the Balenciaga Womenswear Spring/Summer 2026 show in Paris. It was meant to be her comeback moment, a fashion rebirth, her attempt to reclaim the glamour she'd lost since stepping away from the royal family. She wore an all-white ensemble, structured, dramatic, pure. To her, it symbolized peace, renewal, a fresh start. But to the watching world, that same white looked like irony. Because peace was the last thing she brought with her that week. For years, Meghan had carefully cultivated an image of control. Polished, composed, powerful. But something about Paris cracked that illusion. It wasn't the clothes. It wasn't the lights. It was the attitude. And when she posted that clip, feet up, carefree grin, cruising past the bridge where tragedy once struck, it shattered the delicate wall between her and the legacy she married into. The British press went into overdrive. Headlines screamed across morning front pages. Disgrace in Paris. Meghan mocks Diana's memory. Royal family in shock over Paris video. But while the public debated, the palace was silent. And that silence spoke volumes. Sources close to the royals began whispering that King Charles had seen the footage himself, that he'd watched it more than once, that he'd called his private secretary immediately afterward. And that one phrase, 5 words, delivered in a clipped, icy tone, would later echo across the palace corridors. She has gone too far. Now, remember, Charles had spent years trying to maintain some sort of peace with Harry and Meghan. Despite the Oprah interview, despite the memoir, despite the Netflix docuseries that painted the royals as villains, Charles had remained, at least publicly, restrained. He'd hoped time and distance might heal things. But the video changed that. Because it wasn't just disrespectful. It was personal. To the king, to William, to the entire memory of Diana. And then came the reports. Within 24 hours, royal aides had begun internal discussions. Senior staffers were deeply disturbed by Meghan's behavior. Princess, and known for her no-nonsense demeanor, was reportedly the first to speak up during a private family conference call. She's mocking what we lost, she allegedly said. If there's any dignity left, this cannot continue. But while the palace simmered, Meghan seemed completely unfazed. She continued to post cryptic captions and fashion photos, smiling for cameras outside the Balenciaga venue. Flanked by bodyguards and photographers, she exuded confidence, maybe even defiance, as if she knew the backlash was coming and decided to own it anyway. And that's what made the situation worse. Because for the monarchy, appearances are everything. Silence is strategy. Restraint is power. But Meghan? Meghan was the opposite of restraint. And in a single weekend, she managed to turn a glamorous event into a royal crisis. You see, there's an unspoken rule in the royal family, a sacred boundary that even outsiders learn quickly. You don't exploit Diana. You don't invoke her memory for gain. And you never, under any circumstances, do something that could be interpreted as dishonoring her legacy. Because Diana isn't just a royal icon. She's the emotional anchor of the British monarchy. And Meghan, intentionally or not, touched that nerve. So here's the contradiction that makes this story so explosive. Meghan often claims to be Diana's modern echo, fighting for independence, love, and compassion against a cold institution. But this time, her actions seemed to mock the very woman she spent years comparing herself to. Was it irony? Or was it exposure? The final unmasking of the Meghan the palace always feared? For many observers, that single clip confirmed what they'd long suspected, that Meghan Markle wasn't misunderstood, she was calculated. That every gesture, every word, every post was part of a strategy. And this time, it backfired spectacularly. Public sentiment flipped overnight. Polls in the UK showed a dramatic drop in Meghan's favorability rating, even among younger demographics that once supported her. The global press, from New York tabloids to French magazines, joined the chorus. Commentators called her tone-deaf, self-absorbed, obsessed with attention. Even neutral outlets began using words like reckless and provocative. And here's where it gets darker. Because while Meghan brushed off the criticism publicly, privately, insiders say her camp went into panic mode. Damage control meetings were held. PR statements were drafted and scrapped. And Harry, who had been largely silent during her Paris trip, was reportedly furious when he realized where she'd filmed the video. Imagine the conversation. A husband watching the world tear into his wife, but also knowing deep down they might have a point. Because for Harry, that tunnel isn't just history, it's trauma. He's spoken about it in documentaries, interviews, even therapy sessions. The sound of flashing bulbs, the feeling of being hunted, the loss that shaped his entire life. And now, his wife was being accused of treating that tragedy like an aesthetic backdrop. What would you do in his place? Defend her publicly? Or question her privately? For King Charles, though, there was no hesitation. His mind was made up. This wasn't a family feud anymore. This was a matter of royal dignity. The palace, as always, responded with silence, but moves were already being made behind the scenes. Advisors began reviewing Meghan's remaining privileges, titles, and official affiliations tied to the royal family. Meetings were reportedly held at Balmoral, and whispers spread through Windsor like wildfire. The king is preparing to act. To the outside world, everything appeared calm. But inside those gilded gates, the mood was electric, tense, unspoken, and final. Because the monarchy runs on one thing above all else: image. And once that image is stained beyond repair, even blood ties can't save you. This wasn't about race. This wasn't about personality clashes. It was about reverence. And the sense that Meghan Markle, knowingly or not, had desecrated the memory of the most beloved royal of all time. And so, the countdown began. Behind palace doors, in quiet corridors lined with portraits of kings and queens long gone, one decision was being drafted. A decision that would finally draw a line in the sand. A decision that would mark the end of Meghan Markle's royal chapter, once and for all. Because when you offend the memory of Diana, when you humiliate the monarchy in the city where she died, when you turn grief into spectacle, you awaken something in the royal family that few ever dare to challenge. The crown forgives many things, but it never forgets disrespect. And that's why, in the days following the Paris Fashion Week scandal, King Charles was reportedly heard saying the 6 words that changed everything. She cannot remain one of us. But what did that mean? A formal removal of titles? A private exile? Or something even more permanent? An unspoken royal erasure from history itself? Because what came next wasn't just a family decision. It was a royal decree, and it would shake Buckingham Palace to its core. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Paris, the city of lights, love, and legacy. But that weekend, it became the city of scandal. From the moment Meghan Markle stepped out of her limousine in front of the Balenciaga show, it was clear this wasn't going to be a quiet reappearance. This was her moment. Cameras flashed like fireworks. The crowd surged. Her security detail formed a wall of black suits and earpieces around her, yet she looked untouchable, poised, polished, glowing in an all-white ensemble that screamed, "I'm back." But behind that calm smile, there was something else, a spark of defiance. Meghan wasn't just attending Paris Fashion Week. She was reclaiming her narrative. For months, she had been out of the headlines. Her Netflix projects had gone quiet. Her Spotify deal had ended abruptly. Her Hollywood circle had thinned. But now, here she was, walking through a sea of photographers, head held high, dressed like a queen without a crown. And she knew the world was watching. She had chosen white, not by accident. White, the color of purity, rebirth, peace. A clever message to her critics, perhaps, but to her detractors, it was arrogance disguised as innocence. Paris Fashion Week, she had told a stylist days before, isn't just about clothes. It's about legacy. It's about owning who I am. And for a brief moment, she did own it. Every camera tilted toward her. Every flashbulb screamed her name. Meghan Markle, the Duchess who dared to leave the crown, was back on top. But what she didn't realize was that her downfall had already begun. Later that afternoon, after the show, after the champagne and photos, came the video. The one she recorded in her car, playful, relaxed, almost careless. She was seen stretching her legs, laughing softly, capturing the Paris skyline through tinted windows. It should have been harmless. It should have been another glossy social post. But it wasn't, because the car wasn't just driving through Paris. It was gliding over the exact route where Princess Diana took her final breath. To Meghan, it was a coincidence. To everyone else, it was desecration. And that's where the real story begins. Within minutes of the video being uploaded to her Instagram stories, users began piecing together the landmarks. Pont Alexander III. Pont des Invalides. The bridge near Pont d'Alma. One commenter wrote, "Wait, isn't that where Diana's accident happened?" Another replied, "It can't be. She wouldn't dare." But the landmarks didn't lie. And once that realization spread, the outrage ignited like gasoline. She's mocking Diana. She's doing this for attention. How could Harry let this happen? Thousands of comments poured in, then hundreds of thousands. The video was screen-recorded, reposted, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Her posture, her smile, even the way she brushed her hair back. Everything became evidence of disrespect. She's driving through the place where her husband's mother died, and she's smiling, one viral post said. If that's not cold, I don't know what is. And suddenly, what was supposed to be Meghan's triumphant return to glamour turned into a full-scale digital inferno. But the real irony? The video wasn't even professionally shot. It wasn't some PR campaign. It was spontaneous, impulsive, a careless glimpse into her real life. And that, perhaps, was the problem. Because in Meghan's world, the real is never separate from the strategic. Every frame carries weight. Every gesture tells a story. She knew the tunnel's history. Everyone does. You can't live in that family, marry into that bloodline, and not know what happened in that Paris underpass. So why post it? Was it rebellion? Was it ignorance? Or was it, as some palace insiders later whispered, a deliberate test? What made the situation even more chilling was that this all happened less than a week after the anniversary of Princess Diana's death. Let that sink in. The anniversary. While royal fans across the world were lighting candles and sharing tributes, Meghan was posting Paris fashion videos and limousine selfies near the very place of tragedy. Coincidence? Maybe. But in the world of royalty, where symbolism is everything, there are no coincidences. That's why the backlash hit harder than anyone could have imagined. French tabloids caught wind. British media picked it up. The headlines turned venomous. Disgraceful. Mockery of a princess. Meghan's Paris stunt sparks royal rage. And then came the American press, caught between defending and condemning her. Some outlets claimed she was simply reclaiming the space, reframing the narrative of tragedy into empowerment. Others weren't so forgiving. One headline read, the most tone-deaf post of the year. But nothing hit as hard as the response from royal watchers, people who had adored Diana for decades. For them, Diana wasn't just a memory, she was sacred ground. And Meghan, by association, had trespassed. Within hours, hashtags were trending globally. Hashtag Diana deserves better, hashtag Meghan disrespect, hashtag royal shame in Paris. The public fury reached levels unseen since Megxit. And yet, as the online world burned, Meghan was photographed smiling outside her hotel, waving to fans, completely unaware, or perhaps unbothered, by the chaos she'd unleashed. That smile became a symbol of arrogance, a Rorschach test of perception, to her fans, resilience, to her critics, provocation. Behind the scenes, however, her team was scrambling. Her publicist reportedly called her within minutes of the backlash hitting X. Take it down, they advised. Now. But it was too late. The clip had already gone viral. Copies were everywhere. And for the palace, there was no turning back. Because the timing, the imagery, the sheer insensitivity of it hit a raw nerve in the royal household. According to insiders, the video was forwarded directly to senior palace aides that evening. It reached Kensington within hours, and by dawn, it was already circulating among the inner circle at Buckingham Palace. One source later claimed that when King Charles saw it, he sat in silence for several minutes. Then, he reportedly said 4 words that no one in the room expected. Enough is enough now. And that was when the gears of the monarchy began to turn. Behind the polished facade of royal diplomacy, the family's image machine kicked into overdrive. Crisis advisors convened. Senior aides drafted confidential memos about possible distancing measures. The phrase royal disengagement appeared in internal communications for the first time since Edward VIII's abdication. But while the royals were fuming in private, the public continued dissecting Meghan's behavior. Some fans tried to defend her. They said she was being unfairly targeted, that people were reading too much into it. She was just in Paris, they argued. Everyone passes by those bridges. But others shot back. Everyone doesn't post it to 12 million followers. Everyone doesn't marry Diana's son. The double standard was inevitable, but so was the emotional weight behind it. Diana's memory isn't just royal history, it's British identity. Her death traumatized a generation. To see that sacred space turned into a fashion accessory felt like betrayal. And here's where the emotional irony kicks in. For years, Meghan had framed herself as the modern Diana, the outsider, the humanitarian, the woman crushed by the institution. She often echoed Diana's struggles in interviews, her compassion, her battle with the press. But now, she wasn't seen as Diana's successor. She was seen as her opposite. That's when the media began calling her the anti-Diana. Not the Princess of Hearts, the Duchess of Hubris. The shift was brutal. In less than 48 hours, Meghan went from trend-setting fashion icon to national disgrace. Even Hollywood gossip sites, usually friendly toward her, began questioning her judgment. Is Meghan Markle sabotaging her own comeback? One asked. And just as the noise peaked, a rumor began spreading quietly, whispered by palace correspondents and insiders, that a royal meeting had been scheduled, a private one, at Balmoral, the same Balmoral castle where the royal family had mourned Diana's death nearly 3 decades earlier. Coincidence? Or poetic justice? At that point, even those close to Meghan couldn't deny it. She had crossed a line. Whether intentional or not, she had reopened a wound that Britain never fully healed. And now, the monarchy was preparing to respond, not through press statements or interviews, but through action. But as the palace moved behind the scenes, Meghan carried on as if nothing had happened. She was seen dining at L'Avenue, smiling at fans, posing for selfies. Paparazzi shouted questions about the video, but she ignored them, gliding past like a woman immune to consequence. Her silence spoke volumes. To some, it was confidence. To others, contempt. Still, something about her calm unnerved people. Because it didn't feel like ignorance, it felt like defiance. Almost as if she was daring the palace to react. And react they did. In the days following the scandal, calls between royal offices intensified. Charles spoke privately with and William, each reportedly expressing outrage. She's dragged us back into the gutter, and allegedly said. The monarchy doesn't recover from this kind of spectacle. And William, always protective of his mother's memory, was said to be beyond furious. He refused to make any public comment, but made one decision immediately. No contact, no communication, no acknowledgement. It was the coldest message of all: silence. By the time the week ended, what had started as a fashion appearance had turned into a constitutional crisis. Royal commentators described it as the Paris incident, a turning point, the spark that would ignite the king's final decision. Because when Meghan's limo passed through those bridges, she didn't just cross the Seine. She crossed a line the crown never forgives. And if Paris was meant to be her rebirth, it became her reckoning instead. Because in Paris, the Duchess of Sussex didn't just lose public favor, she lost the monarchy's mercy. And from that moment on, King Charles had already made up his mind. What came next wouldn't be handled by advisors, PR teams, or lawyers. It would be handled by the king himself, at Balmoral, in silence, with finality. Because what happened in Paris didn't just offend the public, it fractured the royal bloodline once and for all. And when the king acts to protect the legacy of Diana, he acts with the full weight of the crown. But what came next would leave Meghan Markle completely blindsided and redefine what royal exile really means. Because this wasn't just punishment. It was history repeating itself in the most brutal way imaginable. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Inside the royal walls, the atmosphere was electric, tense, heavy, and cold. The moment the Paris video reached Buckingham Palace, something in the air shifted. It wasn't just another scandal. It was personal. Senior aides knew what it meant the second they saw it. The images, Meghan's polished smile, the flash of her white outfit, the limousine's reflection in the tunnel glass, played on loop in the palace's internal briefing room. A silence hung thick as they watched. When it ended, no one spoke. Not at first. Because how do you tell a king that the woman who married his son just turned the place where his ex-wife died into a social media backdrop? The silence finally broke with one voice. "She knows exactly what she's doing," muttered a senior private secretary. Another aide sighed, shaking his head. "If the public sees this, there'll be chaos." But the public had already seen it, and chaos had already begun. That morning, the phone lines at the palace's press office rang nonstop. Reporters demanded statements, clarification, reaction. The staff had no script, no guidance, only orders from above, no comment. But behind the polished press silence, things were boiling. At Clarence House, King Charles's team worked urgently to contain what one insider called an emotional nuclear blast. Advisors whispered in corridors, senior staff scribbled drafts of potential responses. But the king himself? He stayed in his private study, alone, watching the clip again and again. Those who were present said he didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally did, his words were measured but sharp. "She has desecrated something sacred," he said quietly. "Something we can never get back." And that's when the order went out: summon the family. Within hours, Princess Anne had arrived. Prince William was already on his way. Palace drivers and aides scrambled to coordinate a discreet meeting, one that would never appear in official calendars, one the press would only learn about weeks later. But inside the palace, everyone knew. This wasn't a conversation about media control. This was about consequences. Imagine the scene. A long oak table in a private chamber. No cameras, no advisors, no PR handlers. Just family and fury. Anne was the first to speak. "This isn't about image anymore," she said. "It's about respect. She's mocked the memory of your late wife, my late sister-in-law, and she's done it publicly." Her tone was clipped, her expression hard, and was never one for theatrics. She didn't sugarcoat her words. If she were anyone else, she'd be banned from every royal event for life, she continued. Why should her marriage to Harry shield her now? William didn't interrupt. He sat rigid, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled, not with weakness, but with contained anger. "She used my mother for attention," he said. "I can't even look at that video without feeling sick." Those words pierced the silence. Because everyone in that room knew, for William, Diana wasn't just a memory. She was the ache that never healed. And in that moment, King Charles looked at his eldest son and saw, for the first time, the man who would inherit not just the crown, but the wounds that came with it. But it was, and who pushed things further. She leaned forward, locking eyes with her brother. "Charles," she said, "if you do nothing, You're telling the world that our family's history means nothing. That Diana's memory can be toyed with for Instagram likes. You can't let that stand. And then came the moment everyone would later remember. The king exhaled slowly, stood up, and walked toward the window. He looked out at the palace gardens, the same grounds where Diana once took her sons to play, and said quietly, "Then it ends here." No shouting, no drama, just finality. That single sentence carried the full weight of the monarchy. Because when a king says it ends here, it means one thing: someone's about to be erased. But while that meeting was taking place behind closed doors, the outside world was exploding. The video dominated global headlines. Late-night hosts joked about it. Royal biographers tore it apart on live television. Hashtags trended every hour. And the public's reactions split down the middle. Some defended Meghan, saying she was being unfairly targeted by a biased institution. Others, including many of Diana's longtime supporters, said this was unforgivable. "She's using Diana's ghost for fame," one commentator said on national TV. "It's disgraceful." For the palace, every opinion felt like a dagger. Because this wasn't just hurting Meghan's reputation. It was staining the monarchy's legacy. And in royal history, perception is everything. As the fury mounted, the king's aides worked around the clock. Drafts of internal briefings circulated under code names like Operation Disengagement and Protocol 7. One memo reportedly warned, "Public sentiment against the Duchess is escalating. Immediate distancing recommended to preserve royal dignity." Even the Queen Consort, Camilla, weighed in. She was known for keeping her distance from the Sussex drama, but not this time. "She's damaged everything your mother built," she reportedly told Charles during a private breakfast. "Do what must be done." And he intended to. Within 48 hours, the king ordered a confidential assessment of Meghan and Harry's remaining royal privileges. What titles they still legally held. What patronages could be revoked. What constitutional precedents existed for partial exclusion. To outsiders, it sounded cold, bureaucratic. But within those ancient walls, it was more than paperwork. It was exile dressed as protocol. Meanwhile, Harry was thousands of miles away. He'd seen the video too, and sources say he was horrified. He called Meghan immediately, asking, "What were you thinking?" She reportedly brushed it off. "It was just a clip," she said. "People are overreacting." But for Harry, it wasn't just a clip. It was a memory of flashing lights, sirens, chaos, the worst night of his life. That phone call didn't end well. One insider said Harry slammed his phone down after shouting, "You've made it impossible now." But the real storm wasn't in California. It was in London. As royal aides finalized their reports, the media narrative turned even darker. Leaked comments from insiders began appearing in the press. Phrases like irreversible damage and loss of royal trust surfaced. These weren't random leaks. They were signals. Subtle warnings that something big was coming. The palace wasn't just angry. It was preparing for detachment. You see, the monarchy operates like a glacier. It moves slowly, silently, but when it shifts, everything cracks. And that shift had begun. By the week's end, an emergency family meeting was scheduled at Balmoral Castle. The official reason? Private family matters. The real reason? Deciding Meghan Markle's fate. That night, the palace press office quietly contacted select journalists with one cryptic line. "No statements will be made regarding the Duchess of Sussex at this time," which, in royal language, means something's happening. Don't ask yet. Inside Balmoral, preparations were underway. Files compiled, confidential letters sealed, legal advisors consulted. The meeting would include only the king, Princess and Prince William, the three royals known for their firm loyalty to duty above sentiment. No Harry, no Meghan, no negotiation. Because this wasn't a conversation about feelings anymore. This was the monarchy reasserting control. What made it even more telling was that the location, Balmoral, wasn't chosen at random. It was symbolic. That's where the family had gathered when Diana died. That's where the young princes were told their mother was gone. And now, decades later, it would become the place where her memory would be defended. That symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, especially not the king. Royal biographers later said Charles saw the entire episode as a betrayal not just of the family, but of Diana's legacy. It was one thing to criticize the monarchy, but to mock the memory of the woman who humanized it? That was unforgivable. At this point, Even the usually reserved royal advisors began whispering that lines had been crossed. Her Majesty the late Queen would never have allowed this, one aide said quietly. If she were alive, she'd have already acted. And so, Charles prepared to do what his mother once did, enforce silence, but with consequences. The royal machinery began its slow, deliberate motion. Lawyers reviewed the 1917 letters patent, the document that defines who holds royal titles. Advisors debated whether the king could revoke Duchess of Sussex unilaterally. Historical precedents were reviewed: Wallis Simpson, Prince Andrew, Edward VIII. Every move was weighed, every word measured. Because this wasn't just punishment, it was legacy management. But what the palace didn't anticipate was the emotional toll this would take on Harry. As the discussions deepened, his name came up repeatedly. What about him? Aides asked. What happens to the Duke if she loses her status? The king reportedly paused before answering. He made his choice when he left, he said. Now I must make mine. That line, repeated later by palace insiders, became the symbol of finality. When the Balmoral meeting was confirmed, royal staff were sworn to secrecy. Phones were confiscated, notes destroyed after each session. The agenda was labeled Family Integrity. And what was at stake wasn't just a title. It was Meghan Markle's entire royal identity. In less than a week, she had gone from international fashion guest to the subject of an unprecedented royal tribunal. The public didn't know the details, but whispers began to leak. A reckoning is coming, one palace insider hinted to a reporter. This time, they won't look the other way. Meanwhile, Meghan continued to post on social media, her captions strangely serene. To her fans, it looked like confidence. To her critics, denial. And to the royals? Proof that she didn't understand the gravity of what she'd done. Because in the monarchy, silence isn't weakness, it's warning. And the palace's silence now was deafening. By the time the sun set over Balmoral, one thing was clear. The decision would not just redefine Meghan's future, but also send a message to anyone who dared to challenge the crown's authority again. Because to disrespect Diana was to disrespect the monarchy itself. And King Charles, who had spent his entire reign walking the fine line between fatherhood and kingship, finally chose the latter. What followed wasn't just royal procedure. It was personal retribution, delivered through protocol. And as the first meeting at Balmoral concluded, a single line was reportedly added to the internal memo summarizing the king's decision. Her privileges, by order of the sovereign, are to be reviewed and revoked accordingly. That line marked the beginning of the end. Because when a king signs his will into motion, there's no appeal, no negotiation, no turning back. And for Meghan Markle, Paris wasn't just the scene of her scandal. It was the spark that ignited her royal undoing. But the real storm, the one that would strip her of everything she once claimed to represent, was still waiting behind those stone walls in Balmoral Castle. Because what King Charles was about to do next would change royal history forever, and Meghan had no idea what was coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. There are moments in royal history that never make the newspapers. Moments whispered about by aides, hidden in coded diaries, erased from official calendars. The Balmoral meeting was one of them. It wasn't a meeting announced through polished press releases or captured by royal photographers on castle steps. It was silent, closed door, unrecorded. The kind of gathering where history shifts quietly, without witnesses, but with consequences that echo for generations. It was early morning when the king arrived at Balmoral. The Scottish mist hung low over the fields, and the stone castle loomed against the sky like something ancient and unmovable. The air was cold, biting, almost theatrical, as if the land itself knew something monumental was about to unfold. Charles walked through the private entrance, flanked only by his most trusted aide. He didn't speak. His steps were slow, deliberate, heavy with thought. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him. He was not just a father today. He was a king. Minutes later, Princess Anne arrived. No entourage, no fanfare, just her signature stoic presence. She greeted no one. Her eyes said enough. This wasn't a conversation about emotion. It was about duty. Then came Prince William, flying in under the radar. His helicopter landed quietly at the rear field, away from photographers. The future king was not smiling. He hadn't been since Paris. By 9:30 a.m., they were all seated in the king's private study. The same room where Charles once received news of his mother's failing health. The same place where royal decisions were made in whispers. The meeting began with silence, the kind that feels heavier than words. On the polished oak table lay a single folder, thick, marked only with one label, Sussex Review. Charles didn't open it right away. He looked at the faces before him, his sister, his son, and said, "We cannot avoid this any longer," and leaned back in her chair, her tone as sharp as ever. "It's gone too far, Charles. Every headline, every scandal, they chip away at what Mother built. But this," she gestured toward the folder, "this isn't reparable." William didn't speak immediately. He sat rigid, hands clasped, jaw tight. When he finally did, his voice was low. "I don't care about the press," he said. "I care that she filmed herself smiling near the spot where my mother died. That's not ignorance. That's cruelty." Those words hung in the air like a confession. The king said nothing for a long moment. He simply stared at the folder before him, his fingers resting on the edge. "Do you believe," he asked slowly, "that it was intentional?" And didn't hesitate. "It doesn't matter if it was. The damage is done." William nodded in agreement. Intent doesn't absolve disrespect. It was in that moment that Charles opened the folder. Inside were reports, timelines, statements, transcripts of online backlash, even screenshots of the video. Each page was a reminder of how quickly Meghan had become a liability. He read in silence. The sound of rustling paper filled the room. Then, finally, he placed the documents down and said, "Then we act." Those 3 words, simple, restrained, marked the beginning of the end. But what followed wasn't anger. It was strategy, and, ever the realist, led the charge. "We cannot revoke what Parliament hasn't discussed," she said. "But we can withdraw privileges, appearances, access," William added, "and titles. They carry the weight of the crown. They cannot be used as shields." Charles nodded slowly. "We can begin there. A formal disengagement. No invitations, no patronages, no privileges extended under the crown's authority. If they wish to be independent, then let them truly be." It was the royal equivalent of banishment, exile without exile. The meeting continued for hours. Legal advisors joined midway, briefing them on the constitutional mechanics of title revocation. Historical parallels were drawn. Edward VIII's abdication, Princess Margaret's restrictions, even the stripping of Prince Andrew's military honors. Each precedent carried its own shadow, its own warning. But Charles was resolute. "This is not punishment," he said. "It's preservation," and gave a knowing look. "Call it what you want, but history will see it as exile." William added quietly, "And the people will agree with it." Because outside those castle walls, the tide of public opinion had already turned. Polls showed record levels of outrage. Newspapers ran editorials demanding that Meghan's titles be rescinded. Talk shows debated whether she had mocked Diana's legacy. For the first time, the palace and the public were aligned. And that alignment gave Charles power, the kind of unspoken authority that kings rarely enjoy in modern times. Around midday, the discussion shifted from what to do to how to do it. Publicly or privately, one advisor asked. The king paused. Privately first, publicly if necessary. That line became the new royal doctrine. Because while public punishment satisfies outrage, private exclusion lasts longer. Anne's expression didn't change. "If you go through with this, there's no turning back," she said. "I know," Charles replied, "and I'm prepared for that." For a moment, the room fell silent again. A chill drifted through the open window, the Scottish wind carrying whispers of history. The decision was set. The wheels of royal bureaucracy would begin turning immediately. But not everyone in that room was thinking about politics. William's mind was elsewhere, on his brother. He looked up and said quietly, "What about Harry?" The king sighed. "Harry is my son. That will not change," and shot him a sharp glance. "But loyalty cannot come without boundaries, Charles." "I know," he said again, "but I won't punish him for her mistakes. Not yet." That final phrase, "not yet," would haunt him later. By late afternoon, as the advisors departed and the meeting thinned out, the king called for one last document to be drafted. A letter, formal, discreet, and binding, outlining the immediate restrictions on Meghan's royal privileges. The wording was delicate. Every sentence crafted with precision, every clause reviewed for tone. But the message was unmistakable. Meghan Markle's standing within the royal family was effectively suspended. She would no longer receive invitations to official events. Her royal style, though not legally revoked, would no longer be used in correspondence. Her patronages, still technically active, would be reviewed for reassignment. It was the polite version of exile. And as the king signed the document with a slow, deliberate stroke of his pen, history repeated itself. A monarch cutting ties with a woman whose name had become too dangerous for the crown to carry. When the meeting ended, Charles didn't return to his quarters immediately. He walked alone through the castle corridors, past portraits of past monarchs, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, Queen Victoria. Figures who had all faced moments of defiance and responded with iron resolve. He understood now what they must have felt. The loneliness of leadership, the necessity of distance, the quiet grief of choosing the monarchy over family. Outside, rain began to fall softly on the stone walls of Balmoral. It was almost poetic. The heavens themselves seemed to mourn the decision, as though Diana's spirit hovered above, watching the family fracture all over again. But inside, the king felt something else, clarity. Because for months, he'd watched Meghan's actions spiral from controversy to chaos. The Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, the memoirs' thinly veiled attacks. And now, the Paris incident, the one act that crossed the line from criticism to sacrilege. He'd forgiven before. He'd overlooked before. But this was different. This touched the soul of the monarchy, the legacy of a woman whose death had haunted him for decades. This wasn't about the public anymore. It was about conscience. By the time Charles returned to his chambers, his private secretary had already dispatched coded letters to the necessary offices. Each carried the same instruction: immediate implementation of the Balmoral resolution. And within 24 hours, the effects began. Meghan's communications with certain palace departments went unanswered. Her name was quietly removed from upcoming event guest lists. Royal household representatives stopped using her title in internal memos. It was as if she was being erased in real time. But what no one anticipated was that Meghan herself would soon find out, not through an official statement, but through a series of small humiliations. An unreturned call, an invitation rescinded, a notice of title review delivered by courier to her Montecito estate. That's when she realized something was wrong. That's when she began to sense the full weight of what had been decided behind those Scottish walls. And for the first time since Paris, Meghan Markle went quiet. Because this wasn't just media backlash anymore. This was the monarchy moving against her. And when the crown moves, it doesn't move in anger. It moves in permanence. The Balmoral meeting would never appear in royal archives. There would be no official minutes, no public record. But insiders knew. This was the day Meghan Markle's royal chapter was officially closed. And yet, as the ink dried on the king's decree, something else began to stir. Because while Charles had acted in silence, Meghan was already planning her counterattack. She wasn't going down quietly. Not this time. And her next move, bold, defiant, and meticulously calculated, would take the royal family completely off guard. Because when you corner someone who's built their empire on publicity, you can expect one thing: retaliation. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The ink was still wet on the king's signature when the message was quietly delivered across departments. No press announcement, no royal statement, just a few discreet words spoken through hushed corridors. It's done. The Balmoral resolution had taken effect. For Meghan Markle, it began like a ghost. Unseen, unspoken, but undeniably real. Her phone stopped ringing. Her emails to royal correspondents went unanswered. Invitations she had expected, garden parties, state commemorations, charitable events, vanished from her calendar. At first, she assumed it was coincidence. A miscommunication. Bureaucratic delay. But this wasn't bureaucracy. This was the monarchy tightening its grip. Inside Buckingham Palace, the wheels of tradition spun with the precision of an ancient machine. Once the king's order was signed, protocol dictated every step. Advisors prepared formal notices. Legal clerks updated the court circular. Communications staff drafted neutral statements for future use. And yet, despite all the procedure, there was something profoundly human about this act. Because beneath the ink and paperwork, beneath the protocol and politeness, lay the beating heart of betrayal. King Charles hadn't made this decision lightly. He'd agonized over it. as a father, as a man, and as a monarch. But after Paris, after the disrespect, after the endless public mockery of the crown, he reached a conclusion that echoed through the centuries of royal history. The monarchy survives by remembering who it is, and by cutting off those who forget. By dawn, the official language had been finalized. It was brief, cold, and final. Her privileges are hereby revoked. That line, quietly embedded in a sealed document, would become the most consequential royal sentence since Edward VIII's abdication. But what exactly did it mean? In royal terms, privileges are more than symbols. They are the lifelines that tether an individual to the institution, access to royal events, representation under the crown, the right to use certain titles or claim patronages associated with the monarchy. Meghan wasn't being stripped of her duchess title, not yet, but she was being cut out of royal life in every practical sense. No invitations, no correspondence, no place in the royal hierarchy. It was exile in all but name. And yet, even as this quiet purge unfolded, the palace's outward face remained serene. Cameras captured King Charles attending engagements, smiling gently, waving to the crowds. William and Kate appeared at charity events, unbothered, gracious. The monarchy projected calm. But behind that calm lay a storm that few would ever see. Because Harry had just found out. According to royal insiders, it was a phone call that shattered whatever fragile peace remained between father and son. The king had authorized an aide to inform Harry directly, not out of cruelty, but out of duty. The message was simple. Her royal privileges have been revoked. It is final. Silence on the line. Then, reportedly, a quiet, tense voice. You've just declared war on my wife. Charles didn't respond immediately. He didn't have to. The decision spoke for itself. For Harry, it was betrayal, another reminder that the family he once defended now saw him as an outsider. But for the king, it was preservation, a father torn between protecting his son and protecting the monarchy his son had tried to dismantle. And the truth? Both men were right in their own way. Because this wasn't just about Meghan's Paris video anymore. It was about years of conflict. Oprah, Netflix, Spare, and every interview in between. Every accusation. Every headline. Every whisper that chipped away at the royal mystique. Paris was simply the last straw. The king's advisors knew the risks. Publicly revoking Meghan's privileges could spark backlash. Accusations of cruelty, racism, revenge. But privately, it was a necessity. Better a brief storm than a permanent scar, one aide reportedly told the king. So the palace moved forward. Behind the scenes, departments that had once coordinated with Meghan's team began restructuring. Royal patronages quietly reassigned. Her name deleted from upcoming charity events. Her official page on the royal website edited, slimmed down, sanitized, historical rather than current. And just like that, Meghan Markle, the woman who once married into the world's most powerful family, was being erased one digital trace at a time. To the outside world, it looked like nothing had happened. But inside royal circles, everyone knew. She was gone. Meanwhile, in California, Meghan's PR team scrambled. Rumors were spreading, vague at first, then concrete. Royal commentators began hinting at a significant internal shift. One tabloid headline teased, "Palace freezes out Meghan. Privileges revoked." It was enough to set her team into panic mode. Meetings were called. Lawyers consulted. Publicists drafted statements that were never released. Control the narrative, one advisor urged. We cannot let them define this as punishment. But that's exactly how it was being defined, everywhere. Royal analysts compared it to historical exile. Edward VIII gave up his throne for love, one commentator wrote. Meghan Markle lost her crown for ego. And that line stuck. It began trending. Quoted in articles, repeated on talk shows, echoed in forums. The public perception was cemented. The Duchess who once wanted to modernize the monarchy had now been banished by it. Back in London, the palace was eerily quiet about the entire ordeal. No confirmation. No denial. Just silence. The monarchy's oldest and most effective weapon. Because silence creates mystery. And mystery creates control. Still, whispers leaked. According to one insider, the king was both resolute and melancholy. It had to be done, he said. But it will haunt me. Another aide described his mood in the days that followed as cold, focused, and unflinching. That's the thing about royal decisions. They're not emotional in public. The emotion lives behind the crown, unseen, unheard. Meanwhile, Meghan's camp was reportedly furious. She felt blindsided, not by the backlash, but by the speed with which it turned institutional. This isn't just personal, she told a friend, according to one source. It's a message. They want to humiliate me. But the palace wasn't thinking about humiliation. It was thinking about containment. For years, Meghan had been a thorn in their image. Unpredictable, outspoken, uncontrollable. The monarchy runs on quiet obedience. Meghan ran on visibility. The two were never going to coexist. So when Charles signed that decree, he wasn't punishing rebellion. He was restoring order. And yet, even as the institution regained control, cracks were forming in its human core. Because Harry's fury was boiling over. He felt cornered, stripped of agency, watching the two people he loved most, his wife and his father, declare silent war. Friends say he stopped answering calls from his brother altogether. He withdrew from public events. Those close to him describe him as torn, restless, lost. In interviews years earlier, Harry had often said, "I don't want history to repeat itself." But now it had. Not through tragedy, but through exile. And somewhere deep down, he knew this was irreversible. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the king's inner circle began preparing for the next step, formal communication. A carefully worded statement drafted for future necessity, confirming that the Duchess of Sussex no longer held active royal privileges. The plan was to release it only if forced, if Meghan or her representatives made public accusations. They didn't have to wait long. Within a week, Meghan's team leaked to select U.S. outlets that she had been unjustly targeted and frozen out of the royal family. The word revenge appeared in print. It was exactly the trigger the palace had anticipated. And so, the following morning, a short, polished statement appeared in the London Gazette. Following recent developments, His Majesty the King has approved revisions to the roles and privileges of certain members of the royal family, ensuring continued alignment with constitutional precedent and royal protocol. No names, no dramatics, but everyone knew who it was about. That was how the monarchy fights, with precision, not passion. And while Meghan's name was never spoken aloud, her erasure was complete. Public opinion began to shift again, slowly, but decisively. Those who once defended her began questioning her judgment. Former allies stayed quiet. Fashion houses distanced themselves. Invitations to industry events quietly didn't arrive. Even Netflix, which had built entire series around her narrative, began hesitating. She's becoming a liability, one insider reportedly said. The ripple effect was total. And yet, amid all this, the palace wasn't celebrating. There were no smiles, no triumph. Just a deep, unspoken relief. Because this wasn't victory, it was survival. King Charles reportedly told one confidant, "I've done what must be done for the institution, but I fear I've lost my son forever." Those words reveal everything. The cost of monarchy, the price of image, the sacrifice behind the crown. But there's one final irony. Even as Meghan's privileges were stripped away, her fame grew stronger. Because controversy fuels curiosity, and curiosity is power. She knew that, and she would use it. Behind her Montecito gates, Meghan wasn't mourning. She was planning a new PR strategy, a tell-all interview, a brand revival that would make even her critics watch. Because if the palace wanted silence, she was going to give them noise. And this time, it wouldn't be subtle. Because the Duchess who had just been erased was about to write her own comeback story, one that would send shockwaves back across the Atlantic. The king had made his move. Now, it was Meghan's turn. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When the crown strikes, it does so in silence. But when Meghan Markle strikes back, the world hears it. The Balmoral decision might have been sealed behind royal stone walls, but its echo reached California in less than a week. And for Meghan, that silence, that deliberate freeze, wasn't just rejection. It was war. She had seen this playbook before. The quiet erasure. The controlled press leaks. The polished phrases that say nothing and mean everything. She remembered how they had done it to Diana. And she wasn't going to be the next royal ghost. So while the monarchy retreated behind its traditional armor of discretion, Meghan went on offense. Fast. Inside her Montecito mansion, the lights burned late into the night. Her PR team, her legal advisors, her brand strategist, all called in. Not for damage control, for battle strategy. London wants silence, one advisor told her. So we make noise. And Meghan agreed. Because for her, image is oxygen. The palace might have taken her titles, but they couldn't take her spotlight. The first step was subtle. A cryptic Instagram post, a photo of her garden, captioned with just 2 words, still standing. Within an hour, it hit 1 million likes. Fans flooded the comments with support. She's stronger than ever. They can't silence her. Diana would be proud. And that was the key. Diana's name. It had always been her shield, her connection to royal emotion, to public sympathy, to the heart of the people. And Meghan knew it. So she leaned into it. The very memory the palace was trying to protect, she was about to weaponize. Within days, her representatives began calling top American networks. Not to issue statements, to schedule interviews. The message was simple. Meghan Markle had something to say. Producers scrambled. Everyone wanted the exclusive. CNN, ABC, even Netflix. But it was Vanity Fair that struck first. The article dropped quietly on a Sunday morning. No announcement, no teaser. Just a headline that burned through social media like wildfire. Silenced but not broken, Meghan Markle speaks out. The cover image was hauntingly perfect. Meghan in muted tones, gazing straight into the camera, no crown, no jewelry, no pretense. The visual opposite of a royal portrait. And the interview? A masterclass in narrative reversal. She never mentioned King Charles by name. Never attacked the monarchy outright. But every line dripped with implication. I've learned, she said, that sometimes silence is a form of control. I've been told to stay quiet, to let others tell my story. But I've always believed, when someone tries to erase you, you speak louder. It was calculated brilliance. A blend of vulnerability and defiance. And just like that, the war of perception had begun. Within hours, hashtags flipped. Hashtag We Stand With Meghan trended in the US, while hashtag Respect the Crown trended in the UK. 2 worlds, 1 battlefield. In Los Angeles, she was being hailed as a woman reclaiming her voice. In London, she was being condemned as the Duchess who wouldn't disappear. And behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, the reaction was fury, quiet, but unmistakable. She's provoking a response, an aide warned. Then we won't give her one, the king replied. But silence, in the age of social media, is surrender. Because Meghan's narrative was spreading, fast. She wasn't talking about fashion anymore, or fame, or titles. She was talking about power, about survival, about being the woman who walked into the monarchy and refused to be broken by it. The irony was staggering. The same public who had condemned her for the Paris video now saw her as a victim again. Her emotional tone, the soft resilience, the poetic sadness, worked. And for the first time in months, she was back in control. But this wasn't just a PR campaign. It was personal. Behind closed doors, Meghan was angry. Furious, even. Those who knew her best said she felt betrayed, cornered, and underestimated. She told one friend, "They think they can erase me? Watch me make myself unforgettable." And she meant it. Because the next phase of her counterattack wasn't a magazine. It was a documentary. Netflix had been hesitant. Their previous projects with the Sussexes had drawn criticism. But when Meghan pitched this one, the executives leaned forward. It wasn't another reality series or tell-all about the royals. It was something darker. Titled Uncrowned, The Woman Behind the Palace Walls. The premise? A woman's journey from acceptance to exile, thinly veiled fiction, unmistakably autobiographical. Every frame was designed to sting. An unnamed royal institution. A woman trapped in luxury. Whispers of control, silencing, punishment. And most telling of all, a voiceover line that echoed Diana's ghost. They can take your title, but they can never take your truth. The moment that trailer dropped, the internet detonated. Clips went viral within hours. News outlets dissected every shot. One tabloid headline read, "Netflix declares war on Buckingham Palace." And they weren't wrong. Because every frame, every quote, every musical note of that trailer was a challenge. It dared the monarchy to respond. Inside the palace, senior aides gathered once again. Emergency briefings, damage assessments, risk evaluations. This time, it wasn't about Meghan's behavior. It was about her influence. She's reshaping the story, one advisor warned. If we stay silent, she'll own the narrative. But King Charles was unmoved. She's already shown who she is, he said. Let the world decide. And the world did decide, but not in the way he expected. Because while British viewers dismissed the project as sensationalism, the American audience devoured it. The film climbed streaming charts. Social media buzzed with admiration and sympathy. Meghan was no longer the villain of Paris. She was the survivor of Balmoral. But behind her calm public demeanor, she was still restless. Because she knew the palace wasn't finished with her, not yet. She could feel the weight of their silence, the tension building like a storm offshore. Something bigger was coming. Something that would strike back harder than a press release or a title review. And that paranoia began to seep through her interviews, her tone, her presence. She started speaking in metaphors. I've learned that some families protect their image more than their people, she said in one podcast. I've seen what happens when truth threatens tradition. It was clear she was daring them again. Every sentence a provocation, every silence a taunt. And then came the move that stunned everyone. Meghan reached out to one of Diana's former close friends, a journalist who had once been part of the princess's trusted circle. Together, they began discussing a possible memoir. It wouldn't just be about Meghan's royal life. It would be about the monarchy itself, the institution, the culture, the machinery of control. When word of that reached Buckingham Palace, one senior official reportedly turned pale. She's going nuclear, he said, because a memoir like that wouldn't just damage reputations. It would dismantle history. But here's the twist. While Meghan was busy fighting the monarchy in public, she didn't realize that the crown had already prepared its next move. Quiet, invisible, and devastatingly effective.